You're really going to do this, Ruby? My dad bellowed, his face turning red as he slammed his fists on the table. After all I've done for you. Dad, I said evenly, though my heart was pounding. I've been paying your mortgage for the past 4 years. I've done everything I can to help, but I'm not giving you $10,000 to settle a gambling debt. I just can't. His expression twisted into rage. You ungrateful little... He spat, grabbing a glass from the table and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. I flinched but didn't move. My stepmother, Patricia, appeared in the doorway, her face set in a disapproving frown. Ruby, why can't you just help him out? She said, as though she were asking me to pass the salt. My name is Ruby, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. I'm 31, single, and have spent most of my adult life working hard to build a stable career in marketing. My dad, Gerald, is the opposite. He's the kind of man who can charm his way out of anything but has no idea how to manage his own life. When my mom passed away a decade ago, he married Patricia within a year. She wasn't the wicked stepmother stereotype, but she never stood up to him either. Together, they created a toxic bubble where Gerald's bad decisions were constantly excused or swept under the rug. And for years I'd played along, paying the bills and keeping the peace. But this was too much. I'm not doing this, I said, standing up and brushing the glass shards from my jeans. I've sacrificed enough for you, and I won't keep enabling your gambling. If you want to fix this, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Gerald's face turned crimson, his anger boiling over. You're selfish, just like your mother was, always thinking about yourself. The mention of my mom hit like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I'm done, I said, turning to Patricia. And you're just as bad for letting this go on. Her lips tightened, but she didn't respond. That night, I packed a bag, my hands shaking as I stuffed clothes and essentials into it. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. As I zipped the bag shut, I glanced at the folder of documents I'd been quietly compiling, proof of Gerald's gambling addiction, bank statements, and the eviction notice I'd been holding on to as a last resort. Tomorrow, they'd see exactly how serious I was. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds of Elena's guest room. She'd taken me in without hesitation, her usual mix of practicality and empathy on full display. So, what's the plan? She asked, as we sipped coffee at her kitchen table. Because if you think they're going to take this lying down, you're kidding yourself. Elena had been my best friend since college, and she knew my dad's antics better than most. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I'm going to serve them the eviction papers and let the legal system handle it. I can't argue with him anymore, Elena. He just turns it into a guilt trip or an explosion. Good, she said firmly. He's been taking advantage of you for years. It's time he faces some consequences. She wasn't wrong. For the past 4 years, I'd been quietly paying my dad's mortgage, putting my own financial goals on hold because he was in a tough spot. At first, I thought I was doing the right thing, helping family, being the dutiful daughter. But the longer it went on, the clearer it became that I was just enabling him. Every time I tried to talk about his gambling, he'd dismiss it with a laugh or shift the blame to Patricia for nagging him too much. And Patricia? She'd just shrug and say, "That's how he is." Last night had been the final straw. The glass shattering against the wall, his shout about how I was just like my mother. It was like a switch flipped. I wasn't going to let him drag me down any further. After breakfast, I opened the folder I'd brought with me and laid out the evidence. Screenshots of text messages where he'd begged me for money, bank statements showing the payments I'd made on his mortgage, and printouts of gambling hotline referrals I'd given him that he'd ignored. Wow, Elena said, flipping through the pages. You've been holding on to this for a while. I didn't want it to come to this, I admitted. But I knew he'd never stop if I didn't have a plan. This way, when he tries to play the victim, I have proof of everything. She nodded approvingly. Smart. So, when are you dropping the hammer? Tonight, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'll leave the papers and evidence on the kitchen counter when I go to grab the rest of my things. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to guilt me back. As I packed my things to head over, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to my dad's chaos. I was taking control. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the knot in my stomach was wound so tightly I could barely breathe. The house looked the same as always. Peeling paint, a sagging porch, the garden overrun with weeds. It struck me how much this house mirrored my dad's life. Neglected, chaotic, but just barely standing. I stepped inside, bracing myself for what I might find. The living room was empty, but the faint sound of the TV murmured from the back den. My dad and Patricia were probably sitting there, watching some mindless show while pretending everything was fine. I moved quickly, heading to my old room to grab the last of my things. The duffel bag I'd left behind was still where I'd stashed it under the bed, and I filled it with the odds and ends I hadn't taken the night before. Photo albums, a few books, my mom's necklace. On my way out, I paused in the kitchen. The counter, usually cluttered with junk mail and coffee cups, now held a neatly stacked pile of documents. The eviction notice, the financial evidence, and a handwritten note. I picked up the note and reread it one last time. Dad, I've spent years helping you, but you've taken it for granted and used my support to fuel your gambling habit. I can't do this anymore. The mortgage is paid off because of me, and now it's time for you to take responsibility for your actions. The papers explain everything. I hope you can find a way to turn things around, but I won't let you drag me down with you anymore. Love, Ruby. My hand trembled as I placed the note back on top of the pile. It wasn't angry or vindictive, just the truth. And for once, I wasn't afraid to speak it. As I turned to leave, I heard the TV click off. My dad's voice boomed from the den. Ruby, is that you? I froze, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to bolt, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and step into the doorway. Yeah, Dad, I just came to grab the rest of my stuff. He looked at me with a mix of suspicion and annoyance. You're not really leaving, are you? Come on, Ruby, you're overreacting. Patricia chimed in from the couch, her tone exasperated. You can't just walk away from family. I'm not walking away, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm setting boundaries. You'll understand when you read the papers. I didn't wait for their response. I walked out the door, the weight lifting with every step. That evening, I sat in Elena's living room, the eviction papers filed and the note left behind. My heart was still racing from the confrontation, or lack of it, really. Walking out of that house without looking back was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I knew it was the right thing. Elena handed me a cup of tea, sitting down next to me on the couch. How are you feeling? I stared into the steaming cup, searching for an answer. Relieved, I said finally. But also guilty. It's my dad, you know. I keep wondering if I went too far. She gave me a look. Ruby, you've been paying his mortgage for years, and he threw a glass at you when you said no to more money. That's not normal. You didn't go too far. You finally stood up for yourself. I nodded, knowing she was right, but the guilt still lingered. Part of me hoped that leaving the papers and the evidence would force my dad to take a hard look at himself, to finally realize the damage his gambling had caused. But deep down, I wasn't sure he'd ever change. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls from my dad. I didn't answer. Instead, I let the messages pile up, each one angrier than the last. What the hell is this, Ruby? Eviction papers? Are you serious? I can't believe you do this to your own father. You think you're better than me? You're just like your mother. That one stung, but I refused to let it break me. By mid-afternoon, Patricia called, her tone dripping with feigned concern. Ruby, this has gone far enough. Your father is devastated. Do you really want to put him through this? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Patricia, I didn't put him through anything. He did this to himself. If you want to help him, you'll encourage him to get help for his gambling problem. But I'm done cleaning up his messes. She sighed heavily. You're being unreasonable. Family is supposed to stick together. No, I said firmly. Family is supposed to respect and support each other. This isn't that. I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling. The calls and messages only reinforced what I already knew. I couldn't go back. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first. And while it was terrifying, it also felt like freedom. By the following day, the messages from my dad had stopped, replaced by silence that felt almost louder than his shouting. But Patricia was persistent. She left voicemails filled with guilt-laden monologues, saying things like, "We don't know how we're going to manage without you," and "You're turning your back on the people who love you." Love. That word hit a nerve. Love didn't throw glasses or demand thousands of dollars without a second thought. Love didn't guilt you into sacrificing everything while offering nothing in return. "Elena," I said that evening as we sat in her living room, "I think I need to block them. I can't keep listening to this." She nodded. "You've done more for them than most people would. Blocking them doesn't make you a bad person. It's about protecting your sanity." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over my phone screen. It felt so final, cutting off the last thread of communication. But when I thought about everything I'd endured, the shouting, the manipulation, the endless excuses, I pressed the button. That night, I went over the documents with Elena again, double-checking that everything was in order. The eviction notice was airtight, and the evidence of my dad's gambling problem painted a clear picture of why this step was necessary. "You've covered all your bases," Elena said, scanning the papers. "If they try to fight this, they don't stand a chance." "Thanks," I said, managing a small smile. "I just wish it didn't have to come to this." "You gave them every chance to change," she reminded me. "This isn't on you, Ruby. It's on them." Her words gave me some comfort, but the weight of the situation still pressed down on me. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, part of me couldn't shake the sadness of it all. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of hurt and disappointment finally coming to a head. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from the lawyer handling the eviction. "Ruby, I wanted to let you know that your father reached out to us. He's trying to contest the eviction, claiming that he's the rightful owner of the house." I clenched my jaw. "Did he provide any proof?" "No," the lawyer said, "and he doesn't have a leg to stand on. The mortgage was paid off in your name, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This could get messier before it's resolved." "Thanks for letting me know," I said. As I hung up, a new wave of determination surged through me. If my dad wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I wasn't backing down. Over the next week, I focused on gathering every piece of evidence I could to prepare for my father's challenge. Bank statements, text messages, proof of my mortgage payments. It was all there, a clear trail that outlined exactly how much I'd done for him. Elena helped me sort through it all. "Ruby," she said, holding up a particularly damning set of texts where my dad had promised to cut back on gambling if I paid his bills, "this alone shows how manipulative he's been. You've got nothing to worry about." "I know," I said, exhaling slowly, "but it's still exhausting. I can't believe it's come to this. Fighting my own father just to protect myself." "You're not fighting him," she said firmly. "You're standing up for yourself. There's a difference." Later that evening, I received an email from the lawyer handling the eviction. Attached were copies of my dad's challenge to the proceedings, a rambling letter filled with half-truths and outright lies. He claimed I'd only paid the mortgage as a favor, and that he'd always intended to pay me back, though he conveniently provided no evidence of such an arrangement. It was frustrating to read, but also oddly freeing. His letter was desperate, full of holes, and completely unsupported. For the first time, I realized how little power his words held over me when I didn't let them. I replied to the lawyer, attaching additional documentation that refuted every claim in the letter. By the time I hit send, I felt lighter, like I was finally taking control of a situation that had controlled me for far too long. The next morning, the lawyer called with an update. "Ruby, I've reviewed the challenge, and it's baseless. He doesn't have any legal grounds to contest the eviction. We're moving forward as planned. Thank you, I said, relief washing over me. What happens next? The eviction notice will be enforced within the next 30 days, she explained. If he refuses to vacate, law enforcement will get involved. But based on his lack of evidence, I doubt it'll come to that. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, letting the relief sink in. For years, I'd been the one scrambling to fix things, to hold the family together. But now, for the first time, I was the one setting the terms. That evening, I called Elena to share the news. It's finally happening, I said, my voice tinged with both excitement and exhaustion. Damn right it is, she replied. You're taking your life back, Ruby, and it's about time. The day had finally come. I pulled into the driveway, clutching the final eviction paperwork in one hand and my resolve in the other. The house stood there as it always had, but this time it didn't feel like a battle waiting to happen. It felt like closure. I knocked on the door and Patricia answered. Her face fell the moment she saw the papers in my hand. "Oh, Ruby," she said, shaking her head. "Is this really necessary?" "Yes," I said, stepping inside. "It is." My dad was in the living room, sitting in his recliner with the TV remote in one hand and a drink in the other. He glanced up at me, his expression oscillating between annoyance and smugness. "What now?" he grumbled. I dropped the eviction notice on the coffee table in front of him. "This," I said, my voice steady. "You've got 30 days to move out." He picked up the papers, scanning them with a scowl. "You think this means anything?" he sneered, tossing them back onto the table. "I'm your father. You can't just kick me out of my own house." "It's not your house, Dad," I replied. "It hasn't been for years. I've been paying the mortgage, and I have the documents to prove it. The lawyer has already confirmed the eviction is valid." Patricia hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "Ruby, please," she said softly. "We're family. Can't we work something out?" "Family," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Where was that sense of family when he threw a glass at me? Where was it when he demanded $10,000 to cover his gambling debts? I've done everything I can for you both, and all I've gotten in return is manipulation and disrespect. This ends now. My dad stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he spat. "You're just like your mother, always looking for a way to make me the bad guy." I held his gaze, my hands trembling slightly but my voice unwavering. "This isn't about being better or worse. It's about boundaries. I've let you take advantage of me for years, but I'm done. If you want to stay in this house, you'll have to fight the court, not me." He didn't respond, just sat back down with a bitter laugh. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," I said, turning toward the door. "I won't." As I walked out of the house for the last time, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like mine. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I thought my dad or Patricia would launch into another round of frantic calls or try to intimidate me into reversing the eviction. Instead, there was silence. Part of me wondered if they were in denial, thinking I'd change my mind or that the legal process would somehow fall apart. But I knew better. I'd done my homework, covered every detail, and ensured that the law was firmly on my side. One morning, I received an email from the lawyer handling the eviction. "Your father has not filed any formal objections to the notice," she wrote. "If they fail to vacate by the deadline, law enforcement will enforce the eviction." The news brought a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because it confirmed that I was finally free of this toxic cycle, and sadness because deep down, I still wished things had turned out differently. Elena invited me out for lunch to celebrate the progress. "Here's to Ruby, finally setting boundaries and reclaiming her life," she said, raising her glass. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "It's about time, isn't it?" "You're handling this so much better than I would," she said. If it were me, I'd probably be plastering for sale signs on their lawn just to make a point. That's tempting, I admitted, smiling. But I think the papers do the talking for me. As we ate, Elena leaned forward, her expression turning serious. How are you, though? Really? I paused, considering her question. I feel lighter, I said finally. It's like I've been carrying this weight for so long and now I'm starting to let it go. But it's also bittersweet. They're my family, you know. I wish they'd made different choices. That's on them, Elena said firmly. You've done more than enough. It's okay to let go. As the eviction deadline loomed, I drove by the house one last time. The front porch was cluttered with boxes, a sure sign they were preparing to leave. I didn't stop, didn't linger, I just kept driving. That evening, I received a message from my lawyer confirming that my dad and Patricia had vacated the property. The house is now legally yours to manage as you see fit, she wrote. I stared at the message, a wave of emotions washing over me. For years, that house had been a symbol of sacrifice, guilt, and conflict. Now, it was something else entirely, a clean slate. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly free. The first morning after the eviction deadline felt surreal. I woke up to the realization that I no longer had to brace myself for a call from my dad or a guilt-ridden message from Patricia. The house, the conflict, the endless demands, it was all behind me now. I sat on the balcony of Elena's apartment with a cup of coffee, staring out at the city skyline. You seem quiet this morning, Elena said, joining me with her own mug. I think it's finally sinking in, I admitted. It's over. They're out of the house. I can move on. Elena smiled, her tone teasing. And here I was thinking you'd throw a party. I laughed, shaking my head. No, not yet. I think I need to just sit with this for a while. It's like, I've been in survival mode for so long, I don't know what to do with the calm. Over the next week, I began to reconnect with parts of my life I'd put on hold. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time or energy for. I started spending my weekends exploring new hiking trails, breathing in the fresh air and letting myself feel truly present for the first time in years. Elena noticed the change almost immediately. You look lighter, she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. I feel lighter, I replied, realizing it was true. For the first time, I'm not carrying their problems. I'm just me. Good, she said, raising her spatula like a toast. Here's to that. The house was still mine, technically, but I didn't see it as a place to live anymore. It held too many memories, too much baggage. Instead, I decided to put it up for rent. The process was surprisingly cathartic, fixing it up, making decisions about the space, and envisioning someone else finding joy in it. When I handed the keys over to the new tenants, I felt a strange mix of emotions. A touch of sadness for what could have been, but mostly relief and hope for what was ahead. This wasn't just about letting go of a house or a toxic relationship. It was about reclaiming my time, my energy, and my life. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I felt the weight of the past finally lift. A few weeks after the house was rented out, I found myself sitting in a cozy cafe, flipping through photos from my new photography class. I had never realized how much joy I could find in something so simple. For so long, my time and energy had been consumed by my father's demands and the chaos he brought into my life. Now, I was discovering parts of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. Elena joined me, sliding into the seat across from mine with a grin. Look at you, Ruby. Actually smiling. I laughed, setting the photos down. It feels weird, doesn't it? Being happy? It suits you, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. So, what's next on the agenda? World domination? Opening your own photography studio? I rolled my eyes playfully. Nothing that dramatic. Honestly, I think I just want to keep building a life that's mine. No guilt, no pressure, just freedom. Later that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past few months. The eviction, the confrontation, the emotional fallout. It had all felt so overwhelming at the time, like I was wading through quicksand. But now, looking back, I realized how much stronger I'd become because of it. For years, I'd let myself believe that sacrificing for my family was the only way to show love. But love wasn't supposed to feel like an endless obligation, a constant drain on my soul. Love was supposed to build you up, not tear you down. I thought about my dad and Patricia, wondering if they'd learned anything from all this. A part of me hoped they had, but I knew better than to hold my breath. Change wasn't something you could force on people. It had to come from within. As I sat by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The house was rented out, my boundaries were firmly in place, and my future felt wide open. For so long, I'd been defined by what I did for others, by the sacrifices I made, the burdens I carried. But now, I was finally learning to define myself by what I chose to do for me. I picked up my camera, snapping a quick photo of the city skyline. The image captured more than just the view. It captured a moment of clarity, a reminder of how far I'd come. This was my life now, and for the first time it felt like truly mine.
My name is Fiona, and I'm 32 years old. My life has always been a series of calculated steps, or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for the cunning deception that unraveled my world. It all started with a family dinner at our suburban home in Franklin, Tennessee. My husband, Ethan, had invited his mother, Mrs. Grace Harper, and his 16-year-old niece, Lila, over for the weekend. Grace was always cordial in public, but held an air of superiority that made every encounter feel like a chess game where I was always on the defensive. Lila, on the other hand, was a bubbly teenager who seemed harmless, but her mischievous glances often made me question her innocence. During dinner, Grace admired a sapphire necklace I was wearing. It was a gift from my late grandmother, a woman who had taught me the value of perseverance and strength. The necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a legacy, a symbol of everything my grandmother had passed down to me. "Oh, Fiona, what a stunning piece," Grace said, her eyes narrowing as the sapphire sparkled under the dining room chandelier. "It must be worth a fortune." I smiled politely. "It's priceless to me, Mrs. Harper. It was my grandmother's." Grace leaned back, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Family heirlooms are meant to be shared, my dear. Don't you agree?" I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Little did I know this was the beginning of their plan. The following morning, Grace approached me in the kitchen while I was preparing coffee. "Fiona, darling," she began in a sugary tone, "Lila has a formal dance next weekend, and she doesn't have any statement jewelry. She's been raving about your necklace since last night. Would you consider lending it to her for just one evening?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure, Mrs. Harper. It's very delicate, and I'd hate for something to happen to it."
"Oh, nonsense."
"Lila is responsible for her age, and I'll personally ensure it's returned to you in perfect condition," she insisted, her eyes locking onto mine with a determined gaze. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping it would earn me some goodwill in the family. I handed over the necklace, watching as Grace's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. A week passed, and there was no word from Grace or Lila about returning the necklace. I called Ethan's phone, but he was tied up at work and dismissed my concern as paranoia. Frustrated, I decided to visit Grace's home to retrieve it myself. When I arrived, Grace greeted me with a syrupy smile that immediately put me on edge. Lila wasn't home, she claimed, but she assured me the necklace was safe. "Oh, Fiona, don't you trust me?" she said, feigning offense. Lila loved the necklace so much. She wore it to show her friends. She must have accidentally left it at her friend's house. "Which friend?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Grace waved a dismissive hand. Oh, you know how teenagers are. She'll bring it back. Don't be such a worrywart. A few days later, I discovered the truth in the most humiliating way. During a shopping trip in downtown Franklin, I spotted Lila walking into a pawn shop. My heart sank. I followed her inside and watched from a distance as she handed over my grandmother's necklace in exchange for a wad of cash. Anger surged through me, and I stormed up to the counter. What do you think you're doing, Lila? I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. Lila froze, her face turning pale. Aunt Fiona. I was just. Save it, I snapped, snatching the necklace from the stunned pawnbroker before he could finalize the transaction. Lila's excuse spilled out in a rush. Grandma Grace said we could sell it to pay for my trip to Florida. She said you'd never notice it was gone. My blood boiled. Grace had orchestrated the entire scheme, using Lila as her accomplice. I left the shop without another word, clutching the necklace tightly in my hand. That evening, I confronted Ethan, Grace, and Lila at a family meeting. I laid the necklace on the table as evidence. Care to explain this? I asked, glaring at Grace. Grace didn't even flinch. Oh, Fiona, don't be so dramatic. It's just a necklace. Just a necklace? I echoed, my voice shaking. It's my grandmother's legacy, and you tried to sell it behind my back. Lila burst into tears, but Grace remained composed. You're overreacting, dear. It's not like we meant any harm. Not meant any harm? I snapped. You betrayed my trust. Both of you. Ethan, to my shock, sided with his mother. It's not that big of a deal, Fiona. They were just trying to help Lila. Let it go. That was the breaking point. I stood up, holding the necklace close to my chest. No, Ethan, I won't let it go. This is theft, and I won't tolerate it. The following day, I filed a police report against Grace and Lila for attempted theft. While the law took its course, I packed my things and left the house, moving to a friend's place until I could figure out my next steps. Grace and Lila received a stern warning from the police, and the incident left a permanent scar on my relationship with Ethan and his family. I decided to file for divorce, realizing I deserved better than a husband who couldn't stand up for what was right. Now, as I wear the necklace again, I don't just see a family heirloom. I see a reminder of my strength and my ability to stand up for myself, no matter who tries to deceive me.
The morning sun glared through the windshield, reflecting off my white gown as we drove towards the wedding venue. Daniel and I had been planning this day for months, and the excitement bubbled inside me. I, Leah, a 32-year-old nurse, was about to marry the man I thought was my soulmate. "Leah, isn't it beautiful today? Perfect for our wedding," Daniel said, his voice calm and reassuring. I smiled, nodding in agreement, feeling the weight of my engagement ring against my finger. Suddenly, Daniel's eyes fixed on something outside the car. His expression changed from serene to intense in a matter of seconds. "That's Rachel," he muttered under his breath. Rachel, his ex-girlfriend, was walking along the sidewalk, struggling with a heavy bag. "What?" I asked, confused. "Why does that matter?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he slammed on the brakes, jolting me forward. "Leah, get out," he said abruptly. I was taken aback. "What? Why? I need to help her. She's struggling. Just get out now." His tone was sharp, brooking no argument. "But, Daniel, it's our wedding day. Can't we just call someone to help her?" "No time. Just get out." Daniel's voice rose, his eyes not leaving Rachel. I felt a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. Slowly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of the car. The door slammed shut behind me, and Daniel drove off, leaving me standing there in my wedding dress out, alone and bewildered. Tears welled up in my eyes. This was not how I imagined my wedding day. The sight of Daniel's car disappearing around the corner, chasing after his past, shattered something inside me. I felt a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. Had I misjudged the man I was about to marry? Standing on the sidewalk, I realized I had no phone, no wallet, nothing. I was completely stranded. The wedding venue was a 15-minute drive away. I had no choice but to start walking. As I trudged along the road, my mind raced. How had things come to this? Daniel, the charming, attentive man I had fallen in love with, had just abandoned me on our wedding day for his ex-girlfriend. The man who had once listened to my every worry, who had comforted me after long shifts at the hospital, now seemed like a stranger. Every step felt heavier than the last. My mind kept replaying the moment Daniel told me to get out of the car. It didn't make sense. Why would he do this? Was there something between him and Rachel that I didn't know about? By the time I reached the venue, my feet ached and my heart felt even worse. I was a bride without a groom, walking into what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, now clouded with doubt and betrayal. I entered the venue, trying to compose myself. The staff rushed towards me, concern etched on their faces. "Miss Leah, are you okay? Where's Mr. Daniel?" Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I don't know. He left me on the way here." My voice cracked as I spoke. Just then I saw Daniel walking towards me, his face a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Leah, I'm so sorry. I just thought—" "Thought what, Daniel?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "That leaving your bride on the sidewalk on our wedding day was a good idea?" Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization of what he had done was finally dawning on him. The Daniel one knew, the one who was always so sure of himself, now looked lost and defeated. But it was too late. The damage was done. I turned away from him, my heart heavy with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. In the sanctuary of my small dressing room, the weight of the veil felt like a shroud of disillusionment. The reflection in the mirror showed a bride, yet the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. The betrayal of the morning's events gnawed at me, unraveling memories of how Daniel and I had come to this fractured moment. Our story began 2 years ago, under much simpler circumstances. I was introduced to Daniel at a small gathering by mutual friends. He was charming, his laughter infectious, and his interest in my nursing career genuine, or so I had thought. As our relationship progressed, so did the subtleties of Daniel's control. Compliments about my dedication to nursing soon turned into thinly veiled comments about the time it took away from him. "I just miss you, that's all," he'd say, but the implication was clear. His needs should come first. I remembered the evening he first showed his disdain for my job. We were having dinner, and I was excitedly sharing a breakthrough with a patient. Instead of sharing my enthusiasm, he coldly remarked, "Isn't that a bit too much effort for someone who's not even family? You should focus more on what's at home." Those words stung, but I brushed them off, attributing them to stress from his own work. I convinced myself that Daniel's increasingly possessive behavior was just his way of showing love. But as I sat in my wedding dress, abandoned on our wedding day, those excuses crumbled. The turning point came 6 months before our wedding. During a heated argument about our future, Daniel had blurted out, "Maybe you should just quit your job after we're married. Wouldn't you prefer to be a good wife and take care of our home?" I was aghast. "Quit my job? But I love nursing. It's not just a job for me, it's a calling." Daniel scoffed. "A calling? Come on, Leah. It's not like you're saving the world. A wife's place is at home, supporting her husband." That night, I lay awake, wrestling with doubts and Daniel's antiquated views. However, my love for him, blinded by the hope that love could conquer all, led me to dismiss these red flags. The morning of our wedding, those ignored warnings came back to haunt me. As I stood alone in the dressing room, the reality of who Daniel truly was became painfully clear. The man who had vowed to love and protect me had left me on the side of the road for another woman. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was my best friend, Sarah. Her eyes were full of concern. "Leah, are you okay? What happened?" I recounted the morning's events, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah listened, her expression turning from shock to anger. "That's unforgivable, Leah. You deserve so much better than him," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But I love him," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "Love doesn't leave you stranded on the road on your wedding day," Sarah retorted. "You need to think about what's best for you, not him." Her words echoed in my mind as I looked at my reflection again. The bride in the mirror was strong, independent, and deserved respect. Respect that Daniel had failed to give. In that moment, a resolve began to form within me. Daniel's actions today were a clear sign. I couldn't marry a man who saw me as less than an equal, as nothing more than an accessory to his life. Emerging from the dressing room, I found Daniel pacing anxiously in the hallway. He looked up, his face a mask of regret. "Leah, I'm so sorry." I don't know what came over me. Please, can we just forget this happened and move on? Forgetting was not an option. I squared my shoulders, meeting his gaze with newfound determination. No, Daniel, we can't just move on. What you did today, it opened my eyes. I can't marry someone who doesn't respect me or my passions. Daniel's face fell, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over him. But Leah, I love you. This was just a mistake. A mistake that showed your true colors, I said, my voice steady. I deserve someone who supports me, not someone who leaves me on the side of the road for an ex. Turning away from him, I left Daniel standing there, his pleas fading behind me. The decision was painful, but necessary. I would not be a bride today, but I would walk out of this venue with my head held high, ready to face a future where I was valued and respected. The days following the broken wedding were a whirlwind of emotions and hard decisions. It was during a small, tense gathering at my home, with both our families present, that the true extent of Daniel's character began to unravel further. As we sat around the living room, the air was thick with unspoken words and disappointment. My mother, always my pillar of strength, broke the silence. Leah, we support whatever decision you make, but are you sure you want to end things this way? Before I could respond, Daniel, who had been quietly brooding, spoke up. Leah's just overreacting. We can sort this out. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I echoed, my voice laced with incredulity. You left me on the side of the road on our wedding day, Daniel. Daniel's mother, a stern woman who had always been cordial to me, turned to her son with a frown. Daniel, that was inexcusable. You need to make amends. Daniel rolled his eyes, a dismissive gesture that sent a wave of anger through me. I already said I was sorry. What more do you want? I felt my hands clench into fists. His lack of remorse and understanding was infuriating. Sorry doesn't just erase what you did, Daniel. It's not just about today, it's about everything leading up to it. My father, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Leah, we just want you to be happy and respected. If Daniel can't give you that, then maybe it's best to part ways. Daniel scoffed, his arrogance on full display. Oh, please. This is all just being blown out of proportion. Leah knows I'm the best she'll ever have. She's not going to leave me. His words struck a nerve, and I felt a surge of defiance rise within me. The best I'll ever have? Daniel, you've done nothing but belittle my career and my choices. You don't respect me as your partner. Daniel's father, a quiet man, finally interjected. Son, you need to realize the gravity of your actions. You can't treat Leah, or any woman, like this. But Daniel was unrepentant. I don't see why everyone's making such a big deal out of this. Leah, you're just too sensitive. You should be grateful that I'm willing to overlook this and still marry you. The room fell silent, the audacity of his words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. My mother's gaze hardened. Leah is not the one who should be grateful, Daniel. She's a strong, independent woman who deserves someone who truly values her. It was then that I realized the full extent of Daniel's narcissism and disrespect. He saw me not as a partner, but as a possession, something to control and belittle. Daniel, this isn't just about today, it's about how you've treated me all along, I said firmly. I don't need someone who sees me as less than they are. I need a partner who respects and supports me. Daniel's face contorted with anger. Fine. If that's what you want, then we're done. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize your mistake. I looked at him, the man I had once loved, and felt nothing but disappointment and resolve. There's no mistake here, Daniel. The only mistake was thinking you could change. As he stormed out of the room, his family in tow, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The wedding, the relationship, all of it. I had made my choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew it was the right one. In the aftermath of our failed wedding and the tumultuous confrontation with our families, I expected Daniel to retreat, to maybe even show a hint of remorse. Instead, he doubled down, his true nature unraveling in the most public and humiliating way. The day that should have been our wedding turned into a spectacle that I could never have anticipated. I had decided to go through with the reception, not as a celebration of marriage, but as a gathering of friends and family to thank them for their support. But Daniel had other plans. As I mingled with the guests, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, Daniel burst into the venue. His arrival was like a storm, chaotic and unsettling. His eyes, once warm, now bore into me with a strange mix of anger and desperation. "Leah, we need to talk, now," he demanded, grabbing my arm with a force that made me wince. I pulled away, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "There's nothing left to talk about, Daniel." But he was relentless. "You can't just end things like this. We're meant to be together." His words drew the attention of the guests, their murmurs growing louder. I could feel their eyes on us, a mix of pity and curiosity. "Daniel, you left me on our wedding day. You humiliated me. There's no coming back from that," I said, my voice rising. He scoffed. "Oh, come on, Leah. You're overreacting. You know I only did that because I care about you. I wanted to make sure Rachel was okay." The mention of Rachel's name sparked whispers among the guests. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "You care about me?" I countered. "Is that why you compared me to Rachel, belittled my career, and demanded I quit my job?" Daniel's face twisted into a sneer. "You're just too sensitive. You need to learn your place, Leah." My place. Those words echoed in my mind, fueling a fire I hadn't known I possessed. "My place is not with someone who doesn't respect me," I retorted. "I don't need you, Daniel. I never did." His expression shifted from arrogance to something uglier, a mix of rage and wounded pride. "Fine. But you'll regret this, Leah. You'll never find someone like me." I looked at him, seeing him for the petty, insecure man he was. "That's the point, Daniel. I don't want someone like you. I deserve better." With that, I turned my back to him, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, his anger palpable. The guests parted for me, their expressions a mix of respect and sympathy. As I walked away, I heard Daniel's voice, shrill and desperate, calling after me. But I didn't look back. I had closed that chapter of my life, ready to start anew, free from his toxic presence. That day, I not only walked away from a broken wedding, but also from a relationship that had been suffocating me. I walked away with my head held high, my dignity intact, and a heart ready to heal and find true respect and love. In the weeks following the debacle of what should have been my wedding day, I found solace in routine, immersing myself in work and the comfort of friends and family. However, Daniel was not content to fade into the background of my newfound tranquility. It began with unexpected, unnerving encounters. I would often find Daniel waiting outside my workplace, his presence a stark reminder of the control he once wielded over my life. Each time, I firmly told him to leave, but my words seemed to fuel his determination. One evening, as I left the hospital, Daniel confronted me again. His usual arrogance was replaced by a desperation that bordered on mania. "Leah, you can't do this to me. We're meant to be together," he pleaded, blocking my path. I stopped, my patience wearing thin. "Daniel, it's over. You need to accept that and move on." He shook his head, his eyes wild. "No, I won't let you ruin this. We were perfect together. You're just confused." His insistence was unsettling, and I took a step back. "I'm not confused, Daniel. I'm clearer now than I've ever been. We're done." As I tried to move past him, Daniel grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You're not going anywhere. You're mine, Leah." That was the last straw. I pulled away forcefully, my voice loud and clear. "I am not your property, Daniel. I never was. Let go of me now, or I'll call the police." The threat seemed to penetrate his delusion, and he released me, his expression one of shock and anger. "You'll regret this, Leah. You'll see." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked away, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I wouldn't be intimidated or swayed by his threats. True to my word, I reported Daniel's behavior to the police. They took my statement and assured me they would handle it. A sense of empowerment washed over me. I was no longer the woman who would tolerate Daniel's manipulation and disrespect. The next I heard of Daniel was through mutual acquaintances. His obsession with winning me back had cost him. His professional reputation had taken a hit, with colleagues and clients alike distancing themselves from his increasingly erratic behavior. But the real downfall came when news broke that Daniel had been fired from his job. His conduct, once excused as high-strung ambition, was now seen for what it was, a series of aggressive and unprofessional outbursts. As I heard these stories, a part of me felt vindicated. Daniel, who had always prided himself on his control and status, was now unraveling, his true nature exposed for all to see. It was a harsh lesson in humility and respect, one that he had brought upon himself. In a strange way, his downfall was the closure I needed. I had moved on, my life a testament to my resilience and strength. Daniel's descent was a stark reminder of the bullet I had dodged, a life of control and belittlement I had bravely walked away from. I no longer felt anger or sadness when I thought of Daniel. Instead, there was a sense of pity for a man who had lost himself in his own arrogance and a profound gratitude for the freedom and respect I now embraced in my life. Months had passed since the day I decided to turn a page in my life, leaving behind the shadow of a relationship that was more a prison than a partnership. The echoes of Daniel's downfall served as a distant reminder of a path I had narrowly escaped. But life, as it always does, moved forward, and so did I. I found myself in a new town, a fresh start, where whispers of my past were just that, whispers, irrelevant and fading. My days were filled with the fulfilling challenges of my nursing career and the simple joys of newfound freedom. I had grown, not just in strength, but in my understanding of what I truly deserved. It was on a bright Saturday morning, in the quaint local market of my new town, that fate decided to bring a semblance of closure to my story. I was perusing fresh produce when a familiar figure caught my eye. Rachel, Daniel's ex-girlfriend, the unintentional catalyst of my wedding day disaster, was there, browsing not too far from me. Our eyes met, and there was a moment of mutual recognition, followed by a hesitant approach. "Leah," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of surprise and something akin to empathy. "Rachel," I replied, the name feeling strange yet familiar on my tongue. "I heard about, well, everything," she said, her gaze kind. "I'm so sorry for the part I played in it, however unintentional." I shook my head slightly, a small smile on my lips. "You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, you helped me see the truth." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Daniel is a complex person. I've had my fair share of troubles with him." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "Troubles?" She sighed, a weary look crossing her face. "After your wedding day, he wouldn't leave me alone. Kept insisting we were meant to be together. I had to get a restraining order." The news didn't surprise me, but it did bring a sense of finality. Daniel, in his obsession, had spiraled down a path of self-destruction. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Rachel shrugged, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "It's over now. He finally got the message, or at least I hope he did. I'm just trying to move on." "Moving on is the best we can do," I said, feeling a kinship with this woman I once saw as a rival. We chatted for a bit longer, exchanging stories of moving forward and the lessons learned from our encounters with Daniel. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of peace. Walking away from the market, I realized that this chance meeting was more than just a coincidence. It was a reminder of how far I had come, of the strength I had found in myself to overcome adversity and disrespect. My steps were light as I made my way home. The burden of the past finally lifted. I had survived, thrived even, and in doing so had found a deeper appreciation for my own worth. Daniel's chapter in my life was closed, a distant, fading memory. Ahead of me lay a path of my own making, filled with possibilities, and the promise of a future where respect and love were not just desired, but demanded. In that moment, I knew that the best revenge was not in the downfall of the one who wronged me, but in the life I would build, free from his shadow. A life where I was the author of my own story, strong, respected, and unapologetically me. The breeze whipped my hair across my face as the cherry blossoms rained down around us. I looked over at Nolan, taking in his chiseled jawline and kind eyes. He had one hand rested gently on the back of my wheelchair as he pushed me along the winding path in the park. "It's so beautiful here," I said. "Thank you for bringing me." "Of course, darling," Nolan replied, leaning down to plant a soft kiss on my forehead. "I'd do anything for you, you know that." I smiled up at him, my heart swelling. After the accident that left me paralyzed, Nolan had been my rock. He took care of my every need, catering to my wheelchair, helping me bathe, making sure I took my medications. I didn't know what I would do without him. We continued through the park, the pavement smooth beneath my wheelchair. Up ahead, the path sloped downwards towards a small bridge crossing a stream. "Oh, look, the bridge," I said. "Let's stop for a moment once we cross." "Of course," Nolan said, his voice suddenly tense. As we started down the slope, he pivoted my chair sideways. Before I could ask what he was doing, he leaned down, his lips nearly touching my ear. "I'm bankrupt," he whispered harshly. "I've blown through your inheritance. I need that life insurance money if we're going to live comfortably." My heart dropped into my stomach as words registered. "What are you saying?" I gasped. "I'm so sorry about this, darling." With that, he shoved my wheelchair forward with immense force. I screamed as I hurtled down the steep slope, bracing myself as the wheelchair hit the bottom and flipped over, tossing me onto the hard ground. Sharp pain radiated through my body and my vision blurred. "Nolan!" I tried to shout, but it came out as a whimper. I heard his footsteps crunching on the gravel as he approached. When he leaned over me, his face was a mask of anguish. "Oh my God, Alara!" he cried. "I'm so sorry. I lost control of your wheelchair. Here, let me get you back in." As he righted the wheelchair, disbelief flooded through me. He was pretending that this was an accident. He scooped me up and gently placed me back in the seat, his brows knitted together in feigned worry. I scanned the area wildly, but we were alone. "What have you done?" I choked out, barely able to get the words out past the pain in my ribs. "Shh," he soothed. "Try not to move. You might have broken something. I'm going to call an ambulance." As he pretended to dial his phone, I saw a flash of panic cross his face. His plan had gone horribly wrong. He knelt down next to me again, taking my hand in his. "Just hang on, baby. Help is coming. I promise I'll take care of you." The false affection in his voice made me want to vomit. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks as I realized the man I loved had tried to kill me. The steady beep of the heart monitor greeted me as I blinked open my eyes. I was in a hospital room, my body aching. Nolan sat in a chair next to the bed, his leg heavily bandaged. He looked up as I stirred, relief washing over his face. "Oh, thank God you're awake," he gushed, grasping my hand. "I was so worried." My pulse quickened as memories came flooding back. The wheelchair careening down the hill, Nolan's cold confession, his botched attempt to kill me. I yanked my hand away. "Don't touch me," I hissed. Nolan drew back, feigning confusion. "Alara, what's wrong?" "You pushed me down that hill. You wanted me dead for the insurance money," I accused. Nolan's mouth fell open. "What?" "No, it was an accident. I would never hurt you, Alara. I tried to stop the wheelchair, but it went out of control. I jumped down the slope after you, but my leg got caught between the wheelchair spokes as I tried to stop your fall. I'm so sorry I couldn't prevent you from getting hurt." I studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, but found only earnest concern. "The doctors said you have a concussion," Nolan continued. "You must have imagined what happened due to the head trauma." Doubt crept into my mind. Could I have imagined it? My memories from that day were hazy. And now Nolan was injured too. I glanced at his bandaged leg, guilt replacing the suspicion. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I must be confused." Nolan squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's okay. I'm just glad you're all right." Over the next few days, as my injuries healed, Nolan doted on me relentlessly. He fluffed my pillows, fed me soup, and held my hand when the pain meds wore off. His unwavering devotion made me feel foolish for ever questioning his intentions. But as the weeks passed, small things seemed off. Nolan became obsessed with money, poring over our accounts and insurance policies. He insisted on extravagant home modifications to accommodate my wheelchair, urging me to pay for them with my inheritance. One night, as I wheeled into the bedroom, Nolan slammed his laptop shut quickly. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Oh, nothing important," he said, avoiding eye contact. While he was in the shower, I opened the laptop and accessed the browser history. My heart sank as I saw searches for how to increase your spouse's life insurance and big payouts for accidental deaths. Nolan hadn't been searching for accident victims to help. He was researching how to profit from my hypothetical accidental death. Bile rose in my throat as I finally accepted the truth. The devoted caregiver routine was an act to keep me under his control. The man I loved was trying to murder me. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new normal. The doctors said my paralysis was permanent, so Nolan dutifully catered to my needs. But his mask slipped more each day. He obsessed over my inheritance, insisting I use it to convert our home into a wheelchair paradise. Meanwhile, he splurged on golf clubs, TVs, and gadgets. One night at dinner, he brought it up again. "Alara, I really think we should overhaul the entryway and widen the door frames downstairs. We need to make this house accessible for you." I pushed my food around my plate, anxiety churning in my gut. Those renovations will deplete the remainder of my inheritance. Can't we just make do? Nolan frowned, a flash of anger in his eyes. But don't you want to be comfortable and self-sufficient? This inheritance is meant to be used on you. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was preserving those funds to escape someday. Let's just discuss it later, I said weakly, hoping to placate him. After dinner, I went upstairs and discovered Nolan had installed a new safe in our closet. He never mentioned it, and it was already locked. What was he hiding? A few nights later, Nolan left his email open on my laptop. My eyes fixed on one message from an insurance company with the subject line, "Policy Upgrade Request." Hands trembling, I opened it. Nolan had asked to increase my life insurance and add an accidental death payout. When I confronted him, he insisted it was just to provide for me in case of tragedy. But I knew it was premeditation. The final straw came a week later when I overheard Nolan on the phone scheduling a lavish housekeeping service. We didn't need it, but he seemed hell-bent on draining my inheritance with frivolous spending. After he hung up, I wheeled into the kitchen and tossed my checkbook onto the counter. I'll be handling my own finances going forward, I informed him coldly. Nolan's facade fully slipped, his face contorting in anger. How dare you? That money is as much mine as it is yours. It's my inheritance, I shot back, and I'm done letting you blow it. Nolan advanced on me, his voice a low snarl. You ungrateful bitch. After everything I've done for you. Adrenaline coursed through me. The jig is up, Nolan. I won't let you steal my inheritance while you plot my murder. Rage blazed in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. Don't be ridiculous, he sneered. I'll never understand your paranoia. But fine, manage your own money. It doesn't change my love and devotion. His duplicity infuriated me further, but I held my tongue. I needed to protect my finances at all costs until I could find a way out. Over the next few weeks, money became a battleground in our home. I took over the finances, carefully tracking every penny. When Nolan demanded I hire his lavish housekeeping service, I refused. We don't need it, I said firmly. I can handle the cleaning. Nolan's face darkened. But in your condition, I'm fine, I cut him off. We're not wasting money. After that, our arguments escalated. Nolan increasingly spent money behind my back, on expensive takeout when I cooked simple meals, new electronics, anything he desired. One day, I came home to find he had purchased a $3,000 Tempur-Pedic mattress without consulting me. Return it now, I demanded. Why are you being so controlling? He shot back. I'm just trying to make our home nicer for you. Bullshit, I spat. You're bleeding our accounts dry, trying to spend my inheritance before I cut you off. Nolan's expression contorted in rage. For a moment, I thought he might hit me, but he quickly smoothed his face into a mask of polite concern. Elara, I'm worried about you, he said gently. This obsession with money isn't healthy. You know I just want what's best for you. I wanted to scream at his pathetically transparent manipulation, but I held myself in check. Over the next week, small amounts of cash began disappearing from my purse. $20 here, $50 there. I knew Nolan was taking it. Meanwhile, the utilities and credit card bills skyrocketed without explanation. One night I logged into our accounts and realized why. Nolan had increased the thermostat to 85 degrees, changed our cable package to premium channels, and added himself as an authorized user to my credit card. The next morning, I changed the thermostat back and called the cable company to downgrade our plan. When Nolan realized what I'd done, he cornered me in the kitchen. How dare you make changes without consulting me, he bellowed. I refused to cower. I'm correcting your frivolous spending. You're bleeding me dry. Nolan slammed his fist on the counter. That's my money, too. You don't get to control everything. It's my inheritance, I shouted back. I see exactly what you're doing, trying to drain that money, but I won't let you get away with it. Nolan stepped closer, looming over me. You'll regret this, he hissed. That money is the only reason I'm stuck playing your little wheelchair nursemaid. I recoiled at his words, my worst fears confirmed. Our relationship was nothing but a ruse designed to steal my inheritance. Get away from me, I snarled. We're done. I wheeled my chair backwards from him, my heart pounding with rage and adrenaline. The man I loved was gone. All that remained was a manipulating thief trying to drive me to bankruptcy or death. But I wouldn't back down or surrender my independence. Not to him, not to anyone. The battle lines were drawn. After our blow-up, I stopped speaking to Nolan altogether. The loving facade had slipped away, exposing his deceit. Now we coexisted in tense silence, speaking only when necessary. I continued scrutinizing our accounts, noticing strange inconsistencies. Gas and grocery expenditures were double what they should have been. When I asked Nolan about it, he got evasive. "I've just been driving more for errands," he muttered, "and groceries are expensive lately." I knew he was lying and pocketing the extra cash, but I had no proof. Suspicions gnawed at me. Where was he driving? Was he seeing someone else? I decided to find out. I called a private investigator and explained my situation. 2 days later, I received a large envelope in the mail. Hands shaking, I opened it to find photos of Nolan embracing a woman in front of a nice suburban home, captioned with an address. Bile rose in my throat as I realized the truth. Nolan had a secret family. Fury coursed through me. All the manipulation and lies weren't just about money. He was living a double life. I wanted to confront him right away, but I waited. I needed more proof before initiating the inevitable divorce. A few days later, the investigator provided bank records indicating Nolan had purchased the other home outright and was funneling money into a joint account with the other woman. Her name was Celia. Armed with evidence, I decided to confront Nolan at the hospital where he volunteered, a smokescreen for his deceit. As I wheeled into the hospital lobby, I spotted Nolan at the front desk flirting with a nurse. Before he saw me, I called out loudly, "Hey, Nolan, how's Celia doing?" Nolan's head whipped around, his face draining of color when he saw me. He quickly masked his shock with feigned confusion. "Who?" he stammered. I threw the envelope of evidence onto the desk. Photos and bank records spilled out. "Save it!" I spat. "I know about your little wifey across town. Did you really think you could get away with it?" Nolan glared at me coldly. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is absurd." I shook my head in disgust. "The jig is up, Nolan. I'm filing for divorce. Have fun splitting your assets between 2 households." I wheeled my chair away, Nolan calling after me desperately. But I didn't stop. The time for mercy was over. Over the next few days, I met with lawyers to initiate divorce proceedings, documenting Nolan's infidelity and financial deceit. I wanted to ruin him. Soon after, I sat Nolan down at home. "Here are your options," I told him icily. "Agree to a divorce with 0 spousal support, letting me keep 100% of my inheritance, or I'll make sure every one of your friends and family knows exactly what a cheating, swindling scumbag you are." Nolan pleaded with me, but I refused to back down. The man I loved was gone. In his place was a manipulative stranger who needed to pay. After I presented the evidence, Nolan had no choice but to agree to my terms. The divorce was swift and brutal, leaving him financially devastated. I walked away free, my inheritance intact, ready to begin a new chapter away from my lying, cheating ex-husband. What awaited me was unclear, but it had to be better than the nightmare I'd endured. In the months after the divorce, I focused on recovery and adapting to my new normal. My lawyer ensured I received a generous alimony, allowing me to afford live-in care. Though my paralysis persisted, my new doctor encouraged me to stay positive. "Your condition is still evolving," he assured me. "With rehabilitation, you may regain functionality." His optimism lifted my spirits. For the first time since the accident, I had hope. During one appointment, Dr. Fields reviewed my records closely, his brow furrowing. "Let's do some fresh scans," he said. The next day, I received an urgent call from Dr. Fields. "You need to come in immediately," he said gravely. "There are developments." My pulse quickened anxiously as I wheeled into his office. His expression was grim. "What is it?" I asked shakily. "The scans show your spinal cord damage is treatable," he said. "Your previous physician failed to detect this. With surgery, you could walk again." I reeled in shock. "What? But my ex-husband said my paralysis was permanent. Are you saying it's reversible?" Dr. Fields nodded. "Given proper treatment, your prognosis is very good. I believe your previous doctor misinterpreted the scans. Your ex likely concealed this from you." The revelation hit me like a freight train. Nolan had lied to keep me in a wheelchair, dependent on him. Fury boiled up inside me. "That bastard!" I exploded. "He made me believe I'd never walk again. He wanted me helpless so he could control me and access my money. I'm very sorry, Dr. Field said sympathetically. Unfortunately, traumatic spinal cord injuries are often misdiagnosed, but the good news is we can correct this. I'd like to schedule surgery right away. Overwhelmed with emotion, I broke down in tears. For months, I believed I'd spend my life in a wheelchair at the mercy of my lying, cheating ex-husband. But now a chance at freedom stood before me. The night before surgery, I met Nolan at a cafe at his desperate request. He begged me to take him back, claiming he'd changed. Did you know my paralysis was reversible? I demanded. Did you keep it from me? Nolan's silence was damning. Seething with rage, I slapped him hard across the face. You soulless monster! You made me believe I was trapped when I could have walked away from you. Well, tomorrow I'm getting surgery so I can dance on your grave someday. I pray I never see you again. I left Nolan crying at the table, his pathetic apologies echoing behind me. The time for mercy and forgiveness had passed. Tomorrow, a new beginning awaited me. The surgery was a success. In the difficult weeks of recovery and rehabilitation that followed, spite fueled me. I imagined trampling over Nolan's broken body as I reclaimed my strength, vowing he'd never rob me of independence again. On the day I took my first solo steps, tears of joy and relief streamed down my face. I was free at last, ready to walk into a new life on my own terms. Nolan had failed. My backbone remained unbroken. In the weeks after my surgery, I wasted no time seeking final vengeance against Nolan. Legally, financially, I wanted to ruin him completely. I met with my lawyer, providing documentation of Nolan's lies about my medical prognosis. We incorporated it into the divorce proceedings to show premeditation and abuse. Nolan wouldn't just lose money in the split, his reputation would be destroyed. You have ample grounds for additional damages, my lawyer said. We can sequester his assets and income sources. He won't have a cent left when we're through with him. Good, I replied coldly. Take everything. I realized Nolan's bank fraud likely extended beyond just me. I contacted his employer and provided evidence that he had embezzled from client accounts. They immediately opened an investigation, alerting the authorities. Nolan desperately tried to convince me not to expose him further. He even had the audacity to suggest reconciliation. Alara, haven't you punished me enough? He pleaded on the phone. I know I made mistakes, but we can still repair this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. The only mistake I made was ever trusting you, I spat back. You tried to steal my inheritance and leave me helpless. There's no coming back from that. I hung up, feeling re-energized in my mission to obliterate him. The next day, I called his half-sister, Layla, who he always clashed with. I told her everything, from the infidelity to the financial deceit. I knew he was selfish, but this is unbelievable, she fumed. What a wretched snake. He's dead to me. I'll make sure everyone knows what a vile pig he is. In the weeks that followed, Nolan's life unraveled spectacularly. Friends and family shunned him. He lost his job once the fraud was exposed. Even Celia kicked him out once she learned what he did to me, disgusted by his abhorrent behavior. The divorce finalized with me receiving 80% of our shared assets plus permanent alimony payments, money he no longer had. He'd be financially ruined for years. My lawyer called one final time. It's done, he said with satisfaction. Your ex-husband is destitute. His reputation is shredded. You won't be hearing from him again anytime soon. A surge of relief and joy coursed through me. The bitter seeds I'd sown had bloomed into Nolan's complete destruction. He was finally reaping what he deserved, and I was forever free from his poisonous hold on my life. The day my divorce from Nolan was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high, the sunlight warming my face. The settlement had been everything I wanted. Nolan was left penniless and alone, forced to start anew with nothing but his wretched self. In the months that followed, I reveled in my freedom and independence. I returned to work, reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of seeing. Whenever despair crept in, I repeated my mantra, Nolan has no power over you now. My new therapist helped me process the emotional trauma I'd endured. It's important you don't dwell on anger, she counseled gently. Focus your energy on healing so you can fully embrace this new chapter of your life. I took her advice to heart, channeling my energy into constructive pursuits that enriched my life. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping those escaping abusive situations. It strengthened my resolve to never again ignore red flags in a relationship. On my birthday a few months later, my friends threw a party celebrating my freedom. As we raised our glasses, Sarah made a toast. Here's to Alara, for her resilience, courage, and for shattering the chains of her miserable marriage. No one deserves this fresh start more than her. Their cheers filled me with newfound hope. The old Alara, helpless, naive, trapped, was gone. A wiser, stronger woman had taken her place. Slowly, I began dating again. After some duds, I met Adam, a kind divorcee and single father. While affection bloomed between us, I took it slow, keeping healthy boundaries. "I'm so glad you're being cautious," Sarah told me. "After everything you've endured, you deserve someone who treats you like the queen you are." While Adam was nothing like Nolan, trusting again didn't come easily. But in time, as his sincerity was proven, my walls came down, brick by brick. One night, as we strolled in the park, I paused under a canopy of twinkling lights strung between the trees. Here, surrounded by the beauty of new beginnings, my heart opened once more. When Adam proposed several months later, I accepted joyfully. While shadows of the past still lurked, the flame burning inside me was stronger. I was prepared for whatever lay ahead, holding fast to hope. On my second wedding day, I marveled at the new chapters life offers, even after devastation. With grace, courage, and perseverance, dormant seeds of joy still blossom in time. As I walked down the aisle on Adam's arm, tears pricked my eyes. My broken spirit had proven resilient. Love and vitality now stretched brightly before me. While Nolan's betrayal nearly extinguished my light, my inner inferno ultimately raged too strong to suffocate. I am more than a victim or survivor. I am the master of my fate, and my greatest triumphs still await.